Now let's get to the creation of our first swatch. I'm going to click here on your first 3D design, or if you already have your designs in there, you can click on create new design. And as you are in a Tinkercad, you can see this shape, this work plane, and the work plane is the space that we are going to use to place our 3D objects on. It's important to keep our objects on top of the work plane, so we know always what we are exporting, but also to make sure that the objects that we have there are going to be printed correctly. So we are going to start with 3D designing our first swatch. Our swatch is going to be very simple and very easy. What is the swatch? A swatch is a very thin box that we are going to create by squishing the box that we already have in Tinkercad in order to create fabric-like 3D printed textile. So we are going to head to box, place it in the center of the work plane. I'm going to make a small swatch, and I recommend to you to start with designing a small swatch first always. We are going to set the dimensions of the swatch to 50 times 50, and then we are going to adjust the height of the box so it's very thin. So there are many ways how we can do that in Tinkercad. One of them is to adjust the length. Here in the properties section, if you don't see the properties, here is a little arrow that hides the properties menu. So you can, when you click on the menu, it hides, and when you click on the arrow again, then it shows you the properties. So either you can change the properties here by moving this slider or sliding the slider, or you can click next to the slider on the number to write down the number, or you can change directly the number on the Tinkercad, which is my favorite way how to adjust the dimensions. If you click at the bottom on the small white square, then you can see the dimensions, and either you can adjust them manually, so you can write, for example, 50 millimeters. Tinkercad now is set to use millimeters. In case you are in a different country where you don't use millimeters and you don't use the metric system, so you can head to settings, and instead of units, you can choose inches or even bricks, and bricks are just basically points or pixels. So if you'd like to use inches, you can use inches. I'm going to leave it in millimeters. Tinkercad operates, from my perspective, with millimeters, meaning that if you want to have 5 centimeters long swatch, you have to write down 50, because the conversion rate between 1 centimeter to millimeter is 10. You can also adjust the size or the length or any property by heading towards one of these squares. If you click on the black square and move it to the side, then it's going to adjust one specific side, and we are going to make it so it's 50 times 50. So if I click back on this white square, I can see that here is 50 and here's also 50. I'm going to move my point of view to the front view, and to do that I need this square or this box on the top left corner. And if I move here, if I click and move with this box, then what it does is that it shows the work plane and the object from different perspectives. I'm going to click on the front, so I see it from the front, and then I'm going to adjust the height. How do we choose the thickness of our 3D printed fabrics? Well, it's quite difficult to know until we try out, and it also depends on the different type of project that we are creating. So imagine any type of fabric. Not every fabric is the same. Some of them are lighter, some of them are the thicker ones are usually there to protect us, so they're a little bit thicker. And then the light ones, they're usually more fresh, complementary, and but also more delicate. So you have to be more careful when you're using a very thin fabric, like for example satin. But if you think of leather or denim, then these are usually much thicker, and we use them to protect us from either cold or the outside environment. So depending on what is the project, what is the final project that we are going to produce, we can adjust but as we are starting with 3D printing our textiles, the best thing we can do at the beginning and the most fun part is that we can research and explore. So we are going to start with some number, and then we're going to figure out which of the thickness works the best for us. But also we are going to fill our swatch book with different swatches. So anytime in the future we want to create our project, we already have the swatches to choose from, and we just go through our swatch book and choose the thickness that works the best for us. So it's completely up to us how we are going to start, but let's start with something thin but easy to print. Let's start with 0.4. Most fabric is very delicate and very thin. We need to go to 0 point numbers to create a textile-like fabric. Perfect. This is our first swatch. It was very easy, wasn't it? Well, the fun part starts inside of our slicer. So what we need to do now is to download the file and import it into our Prusa slicer to adjust this square to become a 3D printed fabric like textile. Before we click on the export button to download it, I always forget to do it, so don't forget to do so. Click here on the random generated name and rename your file. And the best way to name your file is to write down what it is. I'm going to write down swatch _ and then also the shape of our swatch, because sometimes you can have triangular shape, circular shape. We're going to start with the square shape. So I'm going to write square. And then I'm going to type in also the dimensions, so I don't forget what are the dimensions of this file. It's important to do so because you will only get more and more swatches, more files, and then it's very easy to get lost inside of the amount of files that you have. So it's important that you write down as much information inside of the name of the file, so it's also easy for you to navigate through them in your folders. So I'm going to type 50 times 50 times 0.4. I'm going to export the file, and I'm going to choose the file to be STL file. You can also choose OBJ file. OBJ file is going to store the file with every information inside of the file, even, for example, which color was it colored with. But we don't need that for our printers because the final color is always defined by the color of the filament that we use in the printer. So we can export only simple STL, which is just a collection of all of the points of the object. So without the materials, without the structures, just the simple object. Perfect. Now let's head to our Prusa slicer, prepare our Prusa slicer, and create our first 3D printed swatch.